I'm not quite sure. I might have been inadvertently removed from the space. Anyway, we are now good. We're recovering our numbers, and hopefully we will be back up and running at full strength as soon as possible. We have a number of speakers coming up, and we'll continue the discussion. I don't really know what was going on discussion-wise because I had only just managed to join, and I'm only up for the next supposedly 20 minutes or so anyway. But I believe David Bailey should be up with me. There was a bit of a discussion about the US political system and the choices being somewhat unpalatable, and this applies in many European political systems as well. And we have a sort of polarization of sort of attitudes and options in terms of voting in many respects, and a rise of far right or far left options and voices, which seems to be happening in quite a lot of places. Anyway, I've now got David Bailey back as co-host, so I'm going to say welcome back up, David, and apologies for the crash.
Yeah, good evening, folks. I'm back. It's yeah, interesting day today. I think we've had 2 or 3 crashes at least. So I don't know what's going on, but there you go. Wonder der Technik, you say in German. Wonder of technology. So hopefully we can carry on where we left off. I think I'll go to Forrest first, then Aria, then Terry.
Sounds good. Sorry about that. Not sure. Normally we get a sense that we're about to crash. Some cues. On occasion they just happen randomly. So this was one of those random ones. No way to fix it. But I wanted to speak to the message of that the American system is built in a way to resist an autocrat, a wannabe autocrat. 30 years ago, I would be with you 110%, even though that's illogical. I would have been on board with that notion. But there has been a targeted group of individuals, specifically the Heritage Foundation here in America, that has eroded these barriers along the way, that, you know, was able to get judges into places that weren't qualified to be judges, but they're allowed to be judges, able to manipulate rules and really push this notion of it's called the unitary executive, that the president is essentially a king. And they've been working this angle for a long time. Until the last president, they didn't have a stooge to do it. They didn't have someone willing to take that step to start dismantling some of these parts of the government that are these guardrails. And I have zero compunction that all of those guardrails will be eroded, and it will be done under the guise of legal situations, similar to how Putin does things. You get Congress to pass the law, because if Trump wins the presidency, more than likely that will mean bad things for the House and the Senate. And there will be laws that are passed, and these guardrails will be eroded. I'm here and I feel it. I don't know if other Americans feel the same, but I have no compunction to say whatsoever that we will be in this constitutional crisis until someone else is in that office. But that was all. I have to be up in like 20 minutes. I'll stay up as speaker, but I got to go deal with some children quick.
Thanks very much. Peter, welcome up.
Yeah, thanks, David. Been a bit of a mess tonight. Apologies for that. I couldn't get up. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, I'm up now and recovering from that crash.
No problem. Aria.
Sorry about that. And sorry for potentially being the cause of the crash due to my words. Um, uh, I had a bad conspiracy joke to make there, but I failed miserably at it. So just please take it. Take it as it was. I'm sorry. So just I wanted to really quickly finish up my point, which is, it is important to distinguish between the people that are doing things out of ignorance and the people that are doing things out of indifference, right? And the bad faith actors versus the people that are in echo chambers. And the way you speak to them, the rhetoric using to deal with this is very important, especially if you don't want to actually turn that either large minority or majority, whatever you want to believe about how much of the Republicans tacitly support, Trump because they do so because they feel he's the best option, and how many are actual diehard, fanatics that believe he is the second coming or something. So, it's important to do that. In the same way, it's important when having a conversation with somebody on the far left, right, to understand who is somebody who just, got co-opted and is parroting something that they've heard from one person they respect and they really don't know and they're willing to talk about it, and somebody who is completely brainwashed who won't even have a conversation with you because you're a Nazi off the bat, regardless of them not knowing anything about your beliefs, just because you're not, going lockstep with them. So this is very important, especially if we want to get, support. And just again, it's extremely important to call out issues with the Biden administration, but it's important to caveat that and to explain that Trump is a major threat, and that this is not, tacit support for Trump or shilling for Trump to try to get voters, right? That's something I try to do here. And I'm always very caught in between, right? There's been things I really detest that Biden has done in regards to Israel, and I haven't brought some of them up because I don't think it's productive, right? I think that is giving, fire to Trump, and long term, it's going to be worse for Israel if Trump gets elected, even though in the short term, it's going to be better, I think. So it's just important, these nuances. And, that's one of the reasons why Miria is very important, right? Because we can have these conversations and, there can be the pushback when it gets to the point where it can appear as though something's supporting, but the people aren't, slandered or derailed or, thrown out, assuming they're, as far as said, good faith actors. Right. And that is very important. And that is something that is lacking in general political discourse in this country that we need to get back to if we are going to ever, deal with the threats we are facing, whether it is the Russians, the Iranians, or the Chinese. This is a real issue, and they gain more when we are disunited. And I understand that there are things that we have to speak up about that just cannot be united over, right? There are major issues, but on the other issues, the culture war is a lesser issue than whether or not in 5 or 10 years you or your children or your grandchildren are getting conscripted and getting sent somewhere because there's an actual, war going on, or there is a huge increase in terrorism and various other things that could happen. And you can say I'm catastrophizing, but if you look at how history's been going with this, unless some black swan magically saves us and the aliens come down with, how to serve man, we're not about to stop this. So I appreciate the space. I appreciate the nuances here and the conversations, because this is extremely important. So I really thank you, Forrest and David, because you guys had a back and forth there, and it was very civil, as it almost always is here. And that brings some peace of mind to me, that if it can happen here, it can happen on a larger level.
Yeah, I really hope it can. I was saying when Trump lost the last election, I hope we got past peak silly, because I think we had the Brexit thing. We had AfD being stronger in Germany, and I was really hoping that our politics would get back down to being boring again, because, well, it's the wrong way of looking at it, but politics should be about solving problems and the details of policy, and that had got lost. I think there's a lot to say against charismatic, exciting politics. Terry.
Hi. Yeah, that was a rather sudden crash. I think it was just as Aryeh was saying that something or other was insane. And that's when, to me, it just suddenly all went quiet. But anyway, we're all back again now. So I agree with Aryeh 100% though. What I was going to say was, I think maybe for about the last 5 or 6 years, I've been wondering about infiltration by malignant beings into our political systems, but certainly over the last 2 years, I am now absolutely 100% convinced that we are, or rather Russia is at war with us everywhere, every democracy there is. There is so much going on that so much of the population is still unaware of. And I think that's a huge part of our work that we can do, and that hopefully we can influence others to do. We've got the likes of Timothy Snyder and Gary Kasparov and loads of others that definitely see it. Ben Hodges as well. And although they don't necessarily talk about the kinetic war versus the hybrid war, but I'd never even heard the term of hybrid warfare before. But to me, that is so much that's going on. The corruption levels have definitely risen over the last few years, almost at an exponential rate. And that's why I am now so concerned, I think. My top concern is still Ukraine, but I can see how they have been fighting against it for so long, along with other nations like the Baltic nations and Finland, Romania, Czechia, loads of places. And yet we've even got deliberate infiltration into the EU parliamentary system, the council, into the UN. Oh, there's just, it's bigger than I think any of us had ever imagined. So somehow or other, we've got to find a way to get the rest of the population, including our own media, to wake up. I've forgotten what the phrase is. Wake up and smell the
Coffee. So
yeah, I don't drink coffee. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that's absolutely right. Sorry if this sounds a little bit echoey, but I'm in a different room. I'll be back at my desk in a moment. But I think you're
so long as it's not the bathroom.
It's not. You're absolutely right about that. And I think one of the big problems we've got is that we have this notion of binary warfare, right? So you've either got kinetic warfare when you're at war, but all of this hybrid stuff goes under the radar. So the vast majority of people don't regard us as being at war when we really are, and we have been at war with decades with the KGB and possibly even longer. So there was a brief period in the 90s when maybe we weren't, because they were too busy distracted with trying to maintain their grip somehow. But after Vladimir Putin's rise to power, that definitely changed, and there's been a continuous barrage and escalation after escalation after escalation since then, to which we've made very little response. And as you point out, the corruption is, I hesitate to use the word corruption really, because it's broader than that. It's something that's been going on for a long, long time. And as I was saying when Joe was up, combating this is a big deal. It's not something that you can do easily from one actor. It has to be something that's managed on a broad front, across multiple axes. And there's a big challenge ahead. That's all I'd say. And now I've put everyone to sleep, Peter.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, I think a key point there is that are we or are we not at war with Russia? Well, the simple thing is that the Russians believe that they are, and if that's the case, then we would do better to recognise that we are and take it more seriously. And just because it's not a kinetic war doesn't mean we're not at war with them. Exactly, it's a hybrid war. It's an information war. It's a war of diplomatic incidents and complete lack of the normal observance of rule of law and ways of basically the sort of what we might call the post-World War II rules-based order. And if the Russians don't want to recognise that and play ball with that, then, well, they should be by themselves. We shouldn't be trading with them. We shouldn't be dealing with them. We shouldn't be recognising their embassies. We should be arresting their diplomats and literally storming the embassies to find out all the communications and signals evidence and what have you. And this should have happened already. And the recent ridiculous election scam pretend nonsense they had in Russia was another perfect missed opportunity for the civilized world to say, right, we no longer recognize this government as the legitimate government of Russia. That's it, bang, end. And they just won't do it. It's just absolute, weakness after weakness, lameness after lameness, and at the moment, it's Ukraine that is paying the price and suffering. But if it isn't sorted out, it'll be a lot more countries in relatively short order, unfortunately, as it was in 1938, 1939, etc. A lot of similarities and parallels there, I'm afraid. David, you there, or shall we go to Aria and then Forrest? Let's go to Aria again then.
So I think there were some good points brought up in there. I would like to add, as I think it's pertinent to what was just said, and this is often misquoted and attributed to Leon Trotsky, but was said in a freedom rally for support for the European, defense against the Nazis in 1941 in Ohio by Fannie Hurst. We may not be interested in this war, but it is interested in us. I am not trying to sell it to you, but no one can evade the fact that we are on the path of the storm. We dare not be disunited when liberty, the most precious jewel in our national strongbox, is at stake. And I think that was as true in 1941 as it is now. Right? It is important to remember it does not matter what we think or feel when other people view themselves at war with us. Right? You can be a pacifist, you can be anti-war. I can respect all of that a lot. Right? But there you have to live in reality and understand that there are people that do not care what you think or feel, and that they have weapons and the ability to hurt you. And I think a lot of us, especially in the West, have grown up during a time of plenty where things have been good. And even though there have been, brush wars and genocides in the third world, it's been a lot less than it used to be till recently. And it's been lower level on the news and people's consciousness, right? It's not close to home. It doesn't directly affect them. Even when we were at war in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? The average American knew people that might have served over there, but they didn't. It wasn't in your face in the same way as Ukraine or World War II or Korea or Vietnam or anything like that. So I think it's important, to make people aware of this, because you're 100% right. Most people aren't aware, and they're still living in this delusion that we can go back to life how it was. And I pray there is a black swan event you know, Putin has a heart attack and there's a revolution, the aliens come down, you know, the Jewish view of the Messiah comes. Hell, I'll even take, you know, other people's views of the Messiah coming, whatever it is, right? Short of something like that happening, which I do not believe will happen, this is going to get worse, and we need to wake up. And countries, there are some countries in Europe that are starting to take this seriously. And I think the State Department is aware of this and starting to take it seriously, but they have not gotten their messaging in order. And they need to start doing it, because it's little bits and little blurbs, and then it's contradictory stuff like blinking, going and making that speech, which, again, as I've said multiple times here, you can have disagreements with allies. You can tell them, hey, if you keep striking those oil refineries, we're going to stop giving you weapons, right? And I don't like that. I will completely disagree with that and lobby against that, but they have the right to do that. At the same time, doing that publicly in the way it's being done is very bad, and you're supporting the other side, and then you're hurting, in my opinion, the chances of Biden getting elected, which again gives into Donald Trump, which is a major issue for this country. I think both are very bad and have a variety of issues, but again, I think America can survive Biden. I don't think we can survive in the way our democracy is Trump. And I think that there may be more short-term issues with one or the other. You can take your worldview of it, but long-term, I think that is true. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation when the American economy and generally, let's say, the Western Alliance or the Alliance of Liberal Democracies is actually in a very, very strong position. But we still think about maybe the American empire in decline, which by all measures is far from the truth, yet the democracy does seem shaky. It seems shaky everywhere. You know, in France, we've got Marine Le Pen being the strongest contender. In Germany, the AfD being the strongest contender. Though in both of those democracies, there's very little chance of either of them getting in, I think. With Trump, it's a different ballgame. And Forrest, I expect you're going to come back on that.
Honestly, my brother Ari sometimes goes on, and then I start thinking about what he's talking about, and I forgot the reason I initially put my hand up. Something to do with the past couple minutes, but yeah, just in general, I think many Americans feel what I feel, this existential fear that we could lose what we have, and what we have is fragile, and you're either on the side of democracy or you're not. And MAGA at this moment is not on the side of democracy. I mean, they're not even pretending to hide it anymore. They speak about it often. You know, Trump's "I'm going to be a dictator on day one" speech. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
that's anti-American. That's
absolutely
not what we stand for.
Absolutely. Another angle on this that I think is confusing for me, at least. There is this thing called no labels. Is that right? Where I don't know exactly the background to this, but it came up first when Nikki Haley, I think, was kind of booted out of the campaign or resigned from the campaign, and recently Chris Christie said that he wasn't going to go for a no labels ticket. First question is what's the background to no labels is it a movement? Is there anything behind it, or what's all that about? Because
I don't think. Oh, sorry.
No, the second question is what would happen if a candidate did stand, let's say, from the centre right, from the Republican Party? Would that damage Joe Biden more than it would damage Trump, or how would you see that?
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make. I think ultimately we need those votes going to Joe, because it's just the way the American electorate works is the independents decide who wins. And if the independents go to a third party and there's not a whole lot of momentum, or the current, I want to call it Gaza caucus, the group of people who are supporting Palestinians, let's say, trying to find the words that are less offensive here, are very angry with Joe Biden. Utterly silly, because the other president wants to ban Muslims from coming into the country and will probably do his part to get rid of some. But if they don't support it, that's a chunk, a 2% loss of his last group that helped elect him. And so if they vote for a third party, like what happened with Hillary, with Bernie Sanders, or Jill Stein, you lose those tiny little margins here, and you lose them there, and you lose the election. Joe Biden won by 7 million votes in the popular vote, but really he won the U.S. presidential election by about 40,000 votes in a couple states. And so it is that small. And so we need all those votes going to Biden. And I think there is a very large chunk, a very large middle ground chunk of people like my parents, lifelong Republicans, hate politics, don't ever want to talk about it, but that look at Trump as a joke, as someone that they would never vote for again. And both of them did in 2016, and both of them didn't in 2020. Those people are never going back to Trump. So he's going to have to find new voters, or they have to get less voters out for Biden. And so that's really where the division comes in. But Peter, I'm up and ready. Just we're a little past 5. You started a little bit late if you want to stick on, but I'm here.
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. I will need to go fairly soon. It's been a long day, and I need to sort of wrap up. So stick around another 5 minutes, and then I'll quietly drop down. But meanwhile, I'd like to say thanks to all our listeners. Apologies for the glitches, and thank you to all our speakers. And please do retweet the space, tune in to MriyaReport as often as you can. We are online broadcasting 24/7, 366 days a year this year. And if you are able to make a donation, then please consider doing so, as there are people in Ukraine who need your financial support to maintain their way of life and their freedom. So thanks very much, Forrest. I'll stick around as speaker for a while. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini. Thank you. Good night.
Slava. Rhea, your hand was up, and I think it's gone down again, so I don't know. Do you want to speak?
I apologize. I got a really important text message I need to deal with. Please go on.
No problem. Sorry, I've had something in my mouth. Just bear with me a second.
All right, while we wait, if everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
We are running a fundraiser currently for 2 SBU Alpha units. Peter was just kind of talking about throwing some donations our way. We have Leon from one of those SBU Alpha units joining us on Saturday, 2100 Kyiv time. Even though I type every day the times, I do not know what any of the other time zones for that is. I think it's 18 or 19 UTC. Would love to see you there, and I believe Chuck will be up with us, helping to run an interview, and Princess Cannoli might stop by, all to help raise money for some much needed kit for the soldiers of those SBU Alpha units. They need the day-to-day stuff, your boots especially, and Tracy was talking about it earlier, but boots are a big deal for soldiers. Your you're on your feet all day and you're wearing your boots all day, you're in mud all day. The better the boot, the better the soldier. So if you can help out, toss a couple bones our way, that'd be great. We will do our best to get that money where it needs to go as quickly as we can to help support those two SVU units.
Yeah, it's a fantastic fundraiser. So when we did the cargo pants fundraiser, I think there were a few raised eyebrows about that. You know, really trousers, but really makes a big deal. If you imagine working in a trench, living in a trench for extended periods, things like comfortable jackets that take the armored plates, ear protection, all of these things don't just support you during the course of a very, very tiring and emotional war, but also protect things in the long term and keep you fit and healthy.
Certainly, and I imagine having a good jacket when they're constantly in the woods, in the bush, in the shrubs, all that stuff, constantly ripping all of your clothing on your knees, up, down, like something I never would have thought of, never pondered at all. And if you don't have the best stuff, you're cold, you're ripped, you're dirty, and dirty soldier's probably not a happy soldier, and the happy soldier's not the best soldier it can be. So something easy we can do. If you've got the means, please follow through, and we will take that and rapidly turn that around. We've done really well with our fundraisers as of late, and it's a blessing to watch. I love seeing the videos after the soldiers get their stuff and they send videos. I don't even think we asked for them. I'm pretty sure they just send them, but a couple of them have moved me a little bit. I've said a few times I'm not a very emotional guy, but a tear has been shed once or twice watching people thank us for doing the bare minimum simply with our pocket change, and it's a humbling experience.
Yep, indeed. So don't get disheartened. There are things you can do to really support this. And as I was saying earlier, if you can afford to donate, this is a thing that we don't want you to do. Don't spend the money that you don't have. If that's the case, then retweet the space, bring your friends, spread the message. I don't think it's easy to understate the importance of just talking to people, walking outside of the door as well, talking to people in the street, and don't go up, don't go up and scare the hell out of them, but building conversations with people around you is a key part of why we're here as well. So yeah, interested to know of all of your experiences in doing that. It's not an easy thing a lot of the time with you know, even if they are friends and family, but it's something that's definitely worth doing. And as I said, if you feel you can't donate for whatever reason, then there are plenty of other ways in supporting. You might know we're always looking for volunteers, so we need volunteers on a number of fronts, not just co-hosting, but also contributing as researcher or in the IT department. There are lots of things that you can do to support MriyaReport outside of donation and outside of even contributing on the space. But please do what you can. It's our democracy we're fighting for as much as Ukraine's. I was having a discussion earlier today with a filmmaker friend of mine. I especially lived with him while I was at university. And he was saying that a lot of the filming that's made for humanitarian organizations these days kind of misses the point by focusing on all of the negative aspects, where a positive message would be much more powerful. So, you know, news of how our donations affect troops on the front line, I think, is a very important part of what we do here on MriyaReport, highlighting how ordinary people can make a big difference. The people of Lithuania, for example, crowdfunded drones for Ukraine, and that was also very successful. So again, it's the power of liberal democracy, it's the power of the network, people talking to each other and taking direct action. And this is something that we need to encourage all across the board, not just with regard to Ukraine, obviously with regard to Ukraine, especially right now, but also in regard to making sure that our democracies are vibrant and function according to the will of the people, which is where the power comes from at the end. Just
Well,
looking at the news. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying, well stated. Go on with the news.
Okay, so I was just looking at an article because Douglas London is in it. So Douglas London's a former CIA operations officer who I think he was in several, including the Moscow station of the CIA. Been on the space a number of times. Very interesting slots if you want to go back and look at the Spotify recordings of those interviews. I think most of them were with Axel. So yeah, two people who know their stuff. Highly recommend going to Spotify, finding those and having a look at them. He's also got a book published which is definitely worth reading. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but I'll do Google that quickly. There's an article that he's not written, but he's interviewed in it regarding why Moscow didn't pay any attention to the CIA information that there were terrorist events planned by Islamic State Khorasan, which is the Afghani division, if you like, of Islamic State, which allegedly planned this attack. Now, what actually happened, I think, is very much up for debate. But what has happened since is that the Kremlin has very much capitalized on this front, on a number of fronts. So basically, first of all, in the article, they quote Bortnikov, who's the head of the SVR, FSB, domestic intelligence. He said that last week's warning from Washington of a potential attack had been of a general nature, whereas we know wasn't of a general nature. It was quite specific that Islamic State would be targeting crowded venues, including concert halls. And then he alleged that Western intelligence agencies were behind it. To quote him, he says, "We believe that radical Islamists prepared the action while Western special services assisted it." So again, it's the Anglo-Saxons who are responsible. So I'd love to see the biotapestry version of this story. Western special services assisted it, and Ukrainian special services had a direct part in it. Bortnikov claimed, without providing further details. So this is all very amusing, and well, not amusing if you have the wrong skin color and you live in Russia, because in the interim period, apart from slicing a poor guy's ear off, even if he did shoot Russians in a concert hall, that's not what you should do. Summarily push somebody to the ground and cut their ear off. They've since been rounding up anyone from Central Asia, in particular Tajiks, and in particular people from the North Caucasus, so Chechnya, and Dagestan, and Ingushetia, and either push them towards the front. I don't know if we've seen any direct evidence of that yet. If we've seen Central Asians being forcibly conscripted, I mean, since this Crocus attack. So we've seen it in the past that, let's say, people regarded as undesirable somehow in Russian society have been pushed towards serving in the military. It happens on a massive scale, of course, generally in the external republics. So in particular Bashkortostan, which is Ufa, is the capital of Bashkortostan. We've seen protests there related to this, which have been quashed harshly. So nothing's come of that. We know that the percentage of people serving in Russia's military is overwhelmingly people outside of Moscow. I think people from Moscow and St. Petersburg make up about 5% of the draft, and they're mainly officers. Surprise, surprise. So it's largely the poorer regions of Russia which are involved in the military operation, or the war, or the genocidal war. And this Crocus attack has really served the Kremlin's purposes in a way which is kind of difficult to reconcile with an external force having done it, because it provides the Kremlin with an outside force, but they've managed to conflate Islamic State with Ukrainian special forces and Western security services, and it's just of so much benefit to the KGB that it's unbelievable, and that gives me some cause to believe that perhaps at the very least they ignored the advice on purpose, on the basis that they could use this evidence. There have been several events in the past of similar nature, so apartment bombings which basically ushered in Putin to the Russian to the Kremlin, whereby the KGB basically blew up flats in a number of places and were caught kind of red-handed in a number of cases where the police arrested FSB officers loading explosives into basements of apartment buildings in Ryazan, which is in the south of Russia. Even more outlandish is that they've claimed that the terrorists were controlled by remote control by Western security services via chips which had been implanted in their brains. So it gets even more ridiculous. It's quite outstandingly bizarre. Again, Will Teal's phrase, Absurdistan, is kind of on point here. And Forrest, I think you're now up as co-host, so welcome up.
Thank you, sir. It's like I've been here the whole time.
Yeah, but maybe you were.
Maybe I was.
Or was that your double?
I would love to have a double. It'd be nice. It'd be multiple places at once. One can chill while the other doesn't. It'd be great. Oh, looks like our jokes have brought Carl forward with a question. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's so much going on in the world, it's hard to keep track sometimes. But I think I heard some reporting last week that Iran also sent Russia a warning about that terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Anybody else hear that?
Yeah, that's correct. So Iran also said that they were warning the FSB and the SVR about this. I don't know the details of what was said to whom and when.
Right.
But I can have a look and see if I can find something.
Cool.
David, this is a mic check. Is someone speaking? Did I lose audio?
No, that's me quickly having a look. And so indeed there's an article in, yeah, it was on April the 1st, so maybe a lot of people took it the wrong way. Iran alerted Russia to security threat before the Moscow attack. It's a report from Reuters on the 1st of April, and they said, I don't know if there's too much detail here. It's very strange why they would ignore both the CIA and Tehran telling them the same thing. And as I said, you know, you've got to ask who wins, and it's although there are motivations why ISIS might have done this. ISIS is at war basically with the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's also not very friendly towards Iran, it has to be said. So why they would have a specific urge to attack Russia is it's not completely off the cards, because as I was saying, you know, within Afghanistan they're basically fighting against the Taliban. We know that both China and Russia have been busy courting the Taliban since Donald Trump and President Biden managed to secure a superb power vacuum in that country. So there are motivations, and ISIS-K or ISIS-Khorasan has been vocal in stating why they would be interested in bombing Russia, and this is precisely because Moscow supports the Taliban. But having said that, you know, the benefit for them in doing this, and also the ill preparedness of the people that were doing it, also the fact that they were already resident in Russia for a long time, it says to me that, you know, either these guys were basically copycat kind of killers, and ISIS were claiming it for. I mean, why wouldn't they claim it, right? if they could. So I don't know. Either Moscow ignored the advice on purpose because they knew something was going to happen, and they could get a benefit out of it for propaganda reasons, or they were deeply complicit in it happening in the first place. I'm not sure there's too much difference between those two positions, but it's certainly very, very suspicious. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah, it's weird. It's definitely something to ponder. I do not follow Iran very closely as far as all my political science stuff that I've been interested in. I've never really gone too deep. But I've always felt for the Iranian people and the ones that seem to want their freedom that haven't been able to take it back. And that ties directly into what we were talking about hour ago. I never want to see my country put in a spot to need to fight back like that.
No, and in contrast to Russia, of course, the people of Iran have been pretty vocal against the Islamic regime. A lot of them were exiled when the regime came to power, and you know, they've been brutally repressed numerous times, and it's ongoing, and it's horrible. So yeah, if you've got no faith in liberal democracy, then go to Iran or North Korea, or go to Russia. Have a look around, and then make your mind up. I always say it's very difficult to explain how things are in places like that, because it's so dramatically different from what we know if we grow up in a liberal democracy. You kind of take those freedoms for granted to a large extent. Speaking about Central Asia, there's also a conflict of information about where the drones came from. Russia's obviously embarrassed that Ukraine might have the potential now to strike 1,200 kilometers within its territory from the Ukraine, because as most of you probably know, a Cessna-sized drone, which seems to be a platform that Ukrainians have been working on for a while, which is based, I think, and I might be wrong about this, but I think it's based on a very light aircraft platform, which they've made into a drone. Maybe someone who knows the story a little bit better can support on this, but there's, as I said, there's skepticism from Russia. The defense minister, Andrei Gurylev, not Shoigu, he's a lieutenant general, so he's part of the Duma's defense committee, was convinced they could only do this with help from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan today has come out and very strongly denied this. You know, from one side, it'd say, well, as they would, right? But I think that the chances are that it's definitely come from Ukrainian territory, and it's definitely feasible that they could build a drone of this nature to attack. So
yeah, the drone technology and the increase in capability is wonderful to see, and I think it helps immensely fill the gap just in general that has been left for their defense and their air defense. But yeah, that was a pretty large drone. And how was it? 1,500 kilometers? Is that how deep that went?
1,200 kilometers to Elabuga. So if you're wondering where Elabuga is, it's if you find Kazan on the map. In fact, that last place I was talking about, Bashkortostan, is kind of one and a half republics away from Tatarstan. So you find Kazan on the map, it's kind of due east from Kazan. So it's north of Nizhnekamsk, which is the oil refinery, which was also struck in the last few days. The Elabuga's site in Elabuga's kind of like a fake technical college, which they've got students to go into on the basis that they would be trained how to do whizzy electronics and so forth. But of course, they're basically slave labor to do these Shahed drone manufacturing tasks. So yeah, 1,200 kilometers. So it's quite a range. But you know, for a drone platform that's flying at relatively low speed with the capacity to hold lots of fuel, it's not a surprise that Ukrainians could do this. Yeah, there's an A-22 Foxbat platform, which is, I think, what they've used. But I heard some other things today, so I'm not sure if I'm actually telling the truth when I say that platform. But it's something that does look very like a Cessna. Yeah, so there are some experts from yesterday saying that it was this Aeropract A-22 Foxbat or an A-32 Vixen ultralight aircraft. Yeah, sorry. So I think that's all I can tell you about that off the top of my head and looking at the article I've got in front of me. What I'm a little bit more surprised about is that we haven't seen any ballistic missiles developed. So I know Ukraine have been developing the Grom or Grim platform for a number of years, and before the full-scale invasion in 2022, Grim 2 was supposed to be close to completion. I spoke to a couple of people that I know who are kind of related to that program, and they said that there are a couple of things which have delayed that development, and one of them is that the fuel, it's a solid rocket fuel engine. It's actually it's not a ballistic missile, it's a cruise missile. And yeah, that fuel manufacturing is quite a difficult process, and it requires a lot of machinery which can produce parts at very high very low tolerance, so it has to be very precisely manufactured. And I think Fabian. I don't know if anyone of you heard Fabian yesterday. Fabian's our friendly rocket expert from Oslo. He's actually a German, Fabian Hoffman. He appears in a very wide selection of journals these days. So he's been published in the FT, Kiev Post, Ukrainska Pravda. So very widely read, very knowledgeable chap. Was on the space yesterday. Forrest, were you around when he was around?
Just had a call pop in. I caught some of it. I generally love to listen to Fabian's segments because we share some interest, but I did not listen with intent enough to be able to speak on it.
No, I was in the same position. So I think he did talk about Krim and also why Ukraine's rocket development, which is very strong, hasn't been able to produce the volume of missiles that they could use. But I think that's changing. So I think we'll see something very soon coming out of Ukraine, which will be very exciting.
I definitely, the next couple years of innovation for Ukraine is going to be insane. And if we could just do our part as Americans, as Brits, as Belgians, as Germans, as everyone who's in here, wherever you're from, and allow Ukraine to get to that moment where their homegrown tech is taking over, I have zero doubt in my mind that their stuff is going to be amazing. Their innovation and their ability to take A and turn it into B, C, D, and E is unmatched in my lifetime since I've been paying attention to stuff like that.
No, I completely agree with you. So I studied in Dnipro for 2 years, and Dnipro is a major industrial center in Ukraine. It was also a major site for the Soviet military-industrial complex, and they made some of the major missile platforms there. They also have a very strong competency in radio frequency technologies. They had a joint venture with Boeing for something called Sea Launch. So that was a satellite launch platform, which was intended to be, as it says, launched from the sea. So to enable much wider geographical areas to be used for launching satellites. I don't think that made a very big commercial dent in the space. Not sure why, but nevertheless, the technology there, the skill base is there. At the start of the war, I think there's definitely a case that some of the engineers that shouldn't have been put into frontline positions were put into frontline positions, which meant that the industry went through a certain amount of disruption at the beginning of the war. But they learned that lesson pretty quickly, and that's something which has definitely been addressed. And over recent days, we've seen one thing after another being announced. So there's also an MRAP, so mine-resistant armored personnel vehicle. I don't know what the Western equivalents of those are off the top of my head, so I'd have to look them up. But I guess you know the kind of thing. It's something bigger than a Humvee, and they normally have kind of a V-shaped chassis, so that improvised explosive devices, IEDs, on the side of the road or mines have a very limited impact on people inside. So it's basically what you want to be putting troops in when they're doing things like breaching minefields, or even patrolling in areas where there may be mines still present. More the case than improvised explosive devices in Ukraine, I think, because obviously they're recovering territory that belongs to them, so there won't be a big insurgency force for them to deal with, which is basically why these vehicles have been designed. But in recent days, there's been a new platform which has been announced. It's a startup based from Kiev University. So 3 young lads have designed a vehicle. It's got private funding, so it's going to be produced in the next 6 months. We'll see the first ones of those coming off the production line. And we're also seeing the mobile howitzer, self-propelled howitzer, which is based on a number of different truck platforms, the Bogdan. This platform, 155 military NATO military standard portable howitzer. Sorry, portable is the wrong word. Self-propelled howitzer. As I said, it's mainly on a truck platform, a Kraz, which is a Ukrainian truck platform, or the Tatra, which is a Czech platform. I'm hesitating because it's made by CSG, which is a Czech called the Czechoslovak group. It's kind of the rump of the former Czechoslovakian arms industry. The company's based in Prague, but it has a lot of facilities in Slovakia as well, obviously. That product is maybe not on a par with an Archer or a Caesar mobile howitzer, self-propelled howitzer, but nevertheless, it's a very good platform. I think it takes 5 people to operate, whereas I think an Archer you can operate with 3 people, so it's a little bit more labor intensive. It's a little bit slower in its firing rate. So I think, if I remember correctly, it's something like 9 rounds a minute, whereas Caesar and Archer are faster than that. Yeah, pickled flicker fella, you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Hey, Forrest. Thank you for hosting this wonderful space, opportunity to be in the speaker panel. Just a couple of things I just wanted to say. I think it was, I can't remember who, they came up earlier, was asking about whether or not Iran warned Russia about the Crocus attack, whatever. So I did repost the news article, and I tagged you, David, and that other individual, I think it was Carl. So just FYI, it came from a Ukrainian news outlet, I guess, the one that I found. And I think you were talking about, when you talk about the armored vehicles, you were asking what the equivalent is for AMRAPs in the US. I think so. US does have AMRAPs as well, mine-resistant ambush protective vehicles. And I think they actually did send some to Ukraine as well a while back too. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know what they're called.
Yeah, they call them AMRAPs. Yeah, there's just different versions, like Max Pro, for example, which is slightly bigger version of it, and then they have lighter ones as well.
Yeah, there's a Dingo. I know there are some Max Pro. I know because I remember the Freedom Legion of Russia.
Yeah,
that was when they were rampaging the first time they went in. There was kind of a bit of unease, let's say, that they were using American vehicles. Complete nonsense. I'm not sure actually how real that story was, whether there was any real concern about vehicles being there. And funnily enough, I think they did lose one vehicle, and the Russians kind of staged a really bizarre photograph of it kind of sitting in a hole somehow, in the most improbable kind of angle of yeah.
Was it Max Pro, David, or was it a Humvee? I thought it was a Humvee.
It might have been a Humvee, in fact. You might be right. I can't remember. I just remember them staging lots of things. There was also a situation when there was a bridge taken out by the Ukrainians, and they'd kind of gathered up a load of civilian cars and perched them on the side of the bridge in the most ridiculous way. Very strange.
Yeah, it's just propaganda, right? That's all it was. Yeah, I know the Humvee you were talking about, they were taking pictures from like many different angles, tried to present it as a different vehicle or something like that. But here's the deal, right? Whatever Ukraine gets, even if it's tanks, doesn't matter. It doesn't it belongs to Ukraine now, right? So there's nothing wrong with Ukraine using those to get across the border, basically, and or give them to Free Russia Legion or whatever legions they're fighting Putin's regime. That's not. That should never be an issue. Just my opinion on that.
I don't think anyone in this space is going to disagree with you on that one. I really don't. I really don't know what to make of it. I mean, either Moscow, either the White House is so sold on this idea of realism and balancing the powers to in order for peace to prevail, or they're playing some kind of strange mind games that we don't understand. And I don't know which of that it is, because the obvious conclusion you have to draw is that they're basically expecting Ukraine to only fight just well enough to maintain the territory that they've got and not do too much damage to Moscow. But this really doesn't make any sense from an American strategic point of view at the moment. It certainly doesn't make any sense for anyone in Europe's point of view. If you consider that NATO is dominated by the United States, well, everyone in NATO apart from the United States at the moment is square behind Ukraine, delivering a crushing victory on Russia. You might argue that Scholz is kind of an anomaly there in the European landscape, but Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, France now, Italy, the UK, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, all, I'd say, highly interested in making sure that Ukraine delivers a resounding victory against.
Did you mention Greece, David? Because they just contributed over $1 billion worth of ammunition through the Czech initiative, I think.
That's right. So Greece has delivered a large number of ammunition, large amount of ammunition, and also there was some news. I think was it last night or was it this morning about Estonia. So Estonia has also found, I think, another 1.5 million shells from somewhere. I've heard conflicting reports of how much has actually been delivered for the Czech initiative and how much financing is in place. My understanding was that this was all done and dusted last week with regard to financing. But I did see a report today from that the Czech foreign minister had said that some of the promised financing hadn't in fact arrived yet. I haven't got that story in front of me, but if anyone wants to talk about it, then you're more than welcome to come up and speak about it. I'll have a look in the background if I can find time. So, Forrest, have you got any particular direction you would like to go in?
I'm a little unsure. I was looking up some of the news on Ukraine Forum. I don't know really how to say that. And it looks like Minister Kuleba had quite the day. That's Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, met with Polish Radoslaw Sikorski, and then also met with sorry, my son just interrupted me. I might have been Hungarian's foreign minister in attempts to obtain more air defense, specifically Patriot, possibly from Poland. So that's somewhere to go. I know that's been Zelensky's talking point everywhere he's gone, and Kuleba, it sounds like that as well, is the whole notion of air support. So. Hold on 1 second. We got a parenting task real quick. I see Alan's hands up. Maybe he has a direct.
Yeah, no problem. I've got another angle here on the Europeans stepping into the breach as America kind of wobbles a little bit. Hopefully not for very long, but it's certainly wobbling at the moment, and certainly Europe is stepping up. And it's interesting. Again, I don't know what to make of this messaging from the White House. From Blinken of all people, who's, I'd say, historically, along with Austin, been kind of more hawkish on everything. I just don't know what to make of it, and especially given the fact that, as I said, parts of NATO who you would expect would be more deferential to Washington's opinion if it was really that opinion, seem to be going their own way. And at the same time, NATO's busy trying to Trump-proof its deliveries to Ukraine. So they're talking about moving the specialized group within NATO, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which is currently chaired by the United States, kind of as you'd expect. They're going to move that headquarters, it seems to be, to Europe, and also put in control of it European generals. So I was just trying to read quickly who it was they were going to put in charge. I guess it's something underway, triggered by Jens Stoltenberg. So one to watch that, I think. Alan, welcome up.
Thank you, David. I was going to mention that as a kind of NATO sidelight here as well. I think it's really interesting. It's not only now European members of NATO trying to Trump-proof the alliance. I had to sneeze there. But the U.S. Senate earlier this year or late last year, in passing the National Defense Authorization Act, included language that prevents any president of the United States from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO. The United States cannot withdraw from NATO without the approval of the United States Senate. This was specifically done to Trump-proof the United States continuation in the NATO alliance. And now we have European leaders also looking ahead, taking precautions. There's the $100 billion defense fund under consideration to be developed by NATO. It would cover about 5 years. So it's not a tremendous amount of money, $100 billion over 5 years, but it's something. And it's significant that it would be overseen by NATO. Same with the Ramstein Conference, the Ukraine Contact Group convened by the United States to move that under the auspices of NATO is a pretty significant precautionary step to Trump-proof both the NATO alliance and support for Ukraine. So I think these are forward-looking precautionary steps, well worth taking. And just a word about Blinken's response at the press conference the other day, and how contrasting it was to the French foreign minister's response, which was simple and direct. Blinken's was neither simple nor direct. It was a tortured use of diplomatic language that said next to nothing. But because it said next to nothing, it said everything. And I think it really draws the curtain up from apparently the debate inside the Biden administration that has been going on probably for as long as the war in Ukraine itself. And this is the debate about red lines and escalation. And it's still an ongoing debate. You know, the new head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Brown, spoke about the likelihood of escalation because of the delivery of ATACMS missiles, for example. He said that that likelihood of Russia seeing ATACMS delivery as an escalation was much less than ever before. So we know really what side General Brown is on, just like Lloyd Austin and formerly Anthony Blinken. My guess is that Blinken was more or less required to respond as he did in the press conference. Required by whom? Well, required by President Biden and quite likely campaign advisors, not security advisors, nor generals, nor admirals. That's just my guess.
Alan, if you watch the video of him speaking, I mentioned this earlier when I was up, he almost looks to be physically fighting the words coming out of his mouth. Like he doesn't want to say it. His body language says, I have to say this right now, which is entirely infuriating, but I don't put so much of it on Blinken. I mean, I guess ultimately we are all responsible for our own words and our own actions. But it was a whole lot of diplomatic speak saying, we didn't do this, it's not our missiles, and we don't ask them to do this. This is on them. But you know,
yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that. I think the interesting thing is if there's some kind of, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but you know, clearly he was laboured in his speech, and he was definitely you know, trying to, like as you said, Alan, trying to say something without actually saying anything very much. I just wonder if there's maybe an element to this which is kind of yeah, you know, not what we think it is. Yeah, I'm struggling to put into words what I think it might be, but maybe there's some kind of strategic calculation here as well. Jerome,
oh, sorry.
Jerome had his hand up, so I'll go to Jerome first.
Thank you, David. I have a comment and then a question. My first comment, because he left, was and Forrest, I think you commented on it also. One comment he made, the previous guest, which I found very interesting. I don't want to criticize him, except for this one thing I wish I could have asked him. He mentioned that Biden is fine. These are not word for word, but that's the comment that Forrest commented on also, that he's sitting back, giving Ukraine just enough while letting the defense contractors profit, something along those lines. I wondered how he proposes that happens. How are the defense contractors getting rich if nothing's going to Ukraine? Or is he implying that they're just simply shipping it everywhere, which I have seen that criticism, but I wanted to ask him that question. So it was confusing to me. Either he had an incomplete thought or something, but I don't know how those two go together. And but I'll leave that. But my question is, if someone could help me. I saw something else, Alan, you raised. It was something with Trump proofing, but the munition supply is being moved, maybe, and if someone could help me out exactly what that is, for like a 5-year plan for munitions production, and would that be an example of industrial capacity leaving the U.S. or something along those lines that could be pointed to, among many other things, as a hit to the United States?
Yeah, so I'd say definitely there's an industrial discussion going on about ramping up production in the European Union, but also in Ukraine itself. And there are a number of elements to that. Now, I did see this story, but I can't remember. But I read it very quickly, and I can't remember the details of it. So I'll go to Alan, and hopefully I can remember or find some details on that for you.
About U.S. defense contractors profiting, and I emphasize profiting and not profiteering, by the way. But they are profiting because the United States is issuing new contracts. So to Lockheed Martin, for example, new contracts for additional HIMARS systems and missiles. And I believe it is also Lockheed Martin. I'd have to double check this, but there is a new missile, a new generation of missiles that will replace ATACMS. ATACMS are going out of production. A new advanced missile that will replace it. The production of this missile is it must be relatively complex because the numbers produced annually are only not many more than 100 from what I recall, but certainly in the hundreds. This means that as soon as the new generation of missile to replace the ATACMS is sufficiently stockpiled, there will be ATACMS missiles ready to be decommissioned. And if the United States has any sense, it will follow what France has done, saying that any decommissioned military materiel will no longer be scrapped. It will be assessed for health and capability and sent to Ukraine. This is exactly what the United States should be doing. Any decommissioned military materiel in the United States, and by the way, this would include Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, Hawk missile systems, various older generations of jets. When this kind of military material is decommissioned, the United States or any other country must pay to scrap it. It becomes a cost. Yet all of this equipment could be of immediate use in Ukraine for the Ukrainian military. So France, I think, has, as I said the other night to Chuck Farrer, when did France begin to speak like the United States, or when did Macron begin to speak like Ronald Reagan, and Joe Biden speak like, I don't know, Jacques Mitterrand? But there has been a role reversal here, quite unexpected.
Yes, there are significant announcements, and there's also something called the European Defence Industry Programme, EDIP, which is the first ever European-wide defence industrial strategy. It's tiny, so this is talking about 1.5 billion of the EU budget over the period 2025 to 27. It's going to make a difference, but it's I suppose we need to look at this in the whole. So what that means in the round and what other countries are doing in addition to that, I think is probably more important. So it's probably more important from the point of view of the overall framework and what other private investment will be going into the industry because of that. But I think there are two important things to say there, and that is that for sure the European arms industry is going to be gaining market share versus the United States because of this situation. I would like to find some more information, and maybe tomorrow during the course of the day I can find some more information and put it up in the nest or something about what this all looks like. It's something we discussed quite a lot during the marathon session we had. Benjamin Tallis and Edward Hunter Christie and who else was there? Anyway, it doesn't matter. There were a couple of other guys there that knew their stuff, talking about this. It's European defence companies are desperately trying to ramp up, and basically they're missing the orders. And so this European defence industry platform, is supposed to start to address that. As I say, I need to look at some details before I can tell you how effective it will be in fact. Jerome?
Oh, can I jump in here before we go to Jerome? I wanted to respond to his initial question.
Yeah, sure.
All right. I tend to feel like extraordinary claims require some extraordinary evidence, and that claim to me is pretty extraordinary. A pretty big accusation, and it fails to consider this grave underlying threat between what's currently happening in the Indo-Pacific with China, what's currently happening with Iran in the Middle East, IRGC, Houthis, that whole realm, and then discounting the fact that Russia is still the menace that it is. And so the world looks and sees all these potential outcomes coming, this potential war happening, and where are you going to go to get the best kit imaginable? You can go a few places. There are a few countries that make maybe one or two things a little better than the US does. But on the whole, our arms industry is going to benefit from a looming global world war. And I just don't think you can just throw that out and say it's the Biden admin colluding with the defense industry when there are real threats, and countries are now worried after what Russia did to Ukraine. It lit this fire in a few countries that they need to take care of themselves. Poland spending billions of dollars here. Did that happen because of the administration, or did that happen because Poland wants to take care of itself? That was my thought there.
Yeah, Jerome, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that comment really perked me up. I just think, you could take a whole show to examine that one sentence that he just kind of threw out there. I mean, I don't know if it's entirely baseless either, but at the same time, in the sense, again, that there does seem to be production, and where is it going? So, but I do like to see, I know everything has to kind of be together with NATO standards and whatnot, but Tim was recounting this morning, I think it was this morning or maybe yesterday, of missile defense, and saying how one of the things with this is you have to work your way through a couple different variations of a given system. So I think it is good to have variations. It's just, again, they're just not reaching the right place. But I really would like to have him dissect that statement, and because I think it would bring up a lot of important points. But maybe next time. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. Appreciate you coming up and asking. Mr. Brewer.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there and add, in terms of, and Forrest, you did make this point, if you are looking for the most modern jet fighter, you contact the United States about the F-35. But if you are looking for a tested, and it's been tested on the Ukrainian battlefield, by the way, Ukrainians love the French self-propelled Caesar howitzer. So there are opportunities here for defense manufacturers in both Europe and the United States to get new contracts, for new production that would be, for example, German Leopard tanks might be purchased by other European NATO member countries. The American Abrams tank are also available for purchase around the world. But as is always the case, I think that defense ministers around the world and generals, admirals, they are looking for the weapons that have been tested in battle. And right now, it is in Ukraine that so many of these weapon systems are being tested. For air defense, the American Patriot system has more than proven itself, intercepting hypersonic missiles fired by Russia. The Gepard system, manufactured in Germany, more than proven itself as a defense against drones. Or the NASAMS air defense system, the Norwegian standard, also proven in air defense in Ukraine. Now, what is even more important than what the future holds for defense manufacturers, whether in the United States or in Europe, what is more important is why Ukraine cannot find an additional 5 to 7 Patriot systems when there are probably more than 100 available. And they're available because they are deployed in countries that face no threat whatsoever, requiring a Patriot air defense system. No threat whatsoever. There are Patriot air defense systems that are not in storage in the United States, but being kept in a state of readiness and used for training on a number of American military bases. You know, these really should be deployed to Ukraine right now. And why they are not, I don't understand. All the Patriot systems that have been given to Ukraine have come from nations like Germany, like Denmark, that purchased these systems. But not a single Patriot system has gone directly from the United States to Ukraine. I find this current moment in the war, it's obviously highly precarious for the Ukrainian military on the front lines and for Ukrainian citizens living under this Russian barrage. But it is also really instructive about American policy, or I should say non-policy. America is stumbling, and it's stumbling badly. And I did not expect the Biden administration, I didn't expect Joe Biden himself to stumble so badly in offering and delivering American support of Ukraine. It mystifies me. It angers me. And again, speaking as an ordinary American, it humiliates me that the United States is not keeping its promise to defend Ukraine. I cannot, for the life of me, get to the bottom of it.
I'm right there with you. Oop, hold on one second. Alan, and I think you just did what I wish plenty of others would do, which is establish criticism for the Biden administration within. Hold on one second. You got to deal with this child real fast. David, can you take over?
Sure. I I was going to say absolutely agree with you there, Alan. It's coming up to the end of my shift, so we've got this fantastic fundraiser underway. Please take a look, make a donation. I'm going to keep my farewells short and come back as a speaker. Alan's coming up to replace me, so welcome up, Alan. And let's go to Jerome while I make a drop, and Alan will be with you shortly.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure to hear you. Yeah, I just have to say on what Alan said again. Latin said it this morning, and Latin aviation, and he was right, but it really hurt when he was saying that the allies of Putin in Congress have already done their work. So it's just really, I don't know, just really hurt to hear that, but truth hurts. And another thing was I haven't seen any the helicopters shot down or planes again, but they're using the airplanes like like artillery basically. I don't know, just haven't seen anything shot down lately. I'm just wondering. I guess they're just staying back and using it like artillery or something.
So, Jerome, simply on that, a few weeks back when they were shooting down everything, what was that, like 11-day stretch? They had pushed an air defense battery fairly close, like within 60 kilometers of the front, and it got targeted on its way to its next location. And there's been some dispute on which type. I've heard people say it's Patriot, but I've heard some Ukrainians say that it wasn't Patriot, that it was S-300. But whatever it was a mix of different equipment, maybe the Franken-SAM that they had pushed forward, and because that got taken out, they've pulled it back. They've pulled back the other assets so that they don't lose multiple air defense systems because they cannot afford to not protect the cities. So that's why we haven't had as many planes shot out of the sky.
Yeah, I was just putting that together with the lack of helicopters too. I didn't know if it's, I don't know, just kind of thinking out loud. All right, yes, thank you, Forrest, and again, thank you guys. Have a good night. It's almost night here in the eastern U.S. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jerome. Forrest, you and I are going to go forward here over the next hour or so. And then I think Robin and I will be taking MriyaReport listeners through the remainder of the evening tonight. I know some of our younger co-hosts, Forrest, have pretty early bedtimes.
I tell you what, I have a fairly early bedtime, but I think I'm allowed. I didn't make it.
All new fathers need early bedtimes, but to David's and your and Jerome's discussion earlier about Trump-proofing NATO. Here's a little bit more information about the 5-year, $100 billion plan to support Ukraine that has been aired by Jens Stoltenberg. This comes primarily from a Financial Times article written by Henry Foy just a couple of days ago. And this is the report in the Financial Times that NATO is drawing up plans to secure a 5-year military aid package of up to $100 billion in an attempt to shield Ukraine from winds of political change that could usher in a second Trump presidency. So this is part of the effort to Trump-proof NATO. And this plan, again drawn up by Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, was actually being discussed today by NATO ministers. I think it's a pretty significant proposal, as Foy reports in the Financial Times. If approved, it would give the alliance control of the U.S.-led Ramstein Weapons Support Group. This is the Ukraine contact group, and allow it to manage the supply of lethal weapons to Ukraine. for the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. And Stoltenberg is stepping down as Secretary General of NATO later this year, in advance of the next NATO summit that's occurring in Washington, D.C. next July, I believe. But this would be something of a crowning achievement for Stoltenberg, I think. It is innovative thinking to use the NATO alliance in this way. It's not been used in this way before, but I think that there is a lot of support for it among the now 32 members of NATO. I'll be interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, it sounds like the right decision to be making at this time. I have faith in the American people and the decent human beings around here that want to keep us as a democracy as opposed to whatever we could devolve into. But I do think that was that plan for the best, prepare for the worst is an apt thing right about now.
I think that is apt, whether you are an American supporting Ukraine to the fullest possible extent, if you are a military war planner in the United States or in Europe or among the NATO member nations, but most significantly, if you are fighting in Ukraine against the Russian invasion here. Russia is planning and will accomplish the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of new soldiers by June. They are training. I would have to put that word in quotation marks. Training thousands of new soldiers every 27 days and shipping them off to Ukraine. So this is Russia using one of its advantages, the advantage of mass, the military mass made up of hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens who are being conscripted into the military. They intend to use that mass as according to Russian doctrine this summer to attempt some kind of overwhelming assault on the ground against Ukraine. I think everyone can see it coming. Chuck spoke about it last night on Bullet Points. He'll be addressing it again Thursday night on Bullet Points. And I think we'll probably bring it up with Language Learner later tonight, Forrest. Language will be with us at 8 p.m. That's in about 90 minutes time with his interactive tour of the Zero Line. And then, I always say to orient yourself in Ukraine and along the 1,500 kilometer long Zero Line, use Language Learner's interactive maps. They are a great help. So that's in 90 minutes time. Language will be with us. We'll try to address this possible impending Russian assault that would appear to be coming with newly mobilized troops in May or June or later this summer. Now, Chuck also mentioned that because of the delay in the United States of supplying Ukraine with everything it urgently needs, even if Congress were to approve the $60 billion of additional aid to Ukraine this month, the month of April, it's not likely that Ukraine will be fully resupplied not only from the United States, but also from Europe with needed artillery shells, with HIMARS missiles, with more air defense missiles, uh, maybe ATACMS. We don't know. But Ukraine will not be fully resupplied until October. So this is why Chuck looks at the summer of 2024 as a kind of make or break moment in this war. Ukraine will have to hold on, and I am confident that they will. I'm confident that they can. But it might also mean that Russia does regain some territory that Ukraine has forced them out of, and we know how Russia will use that in its disinformation campaigns and its propaganda. It would
Well,
be, yeah. Go ahead, Forrest.
I, I think, I guess our ability logistically to get kit to Ukraine is pretty impressive. And with the way it's already set up, I really don't think all of that equipment is going to take that long. Especially when I was in DC, there was there's a large portion of stuff ready. It's waiting to be shipped. It's waiting for a signature. And so I guess I would just place that out there, that I would say a worst case scenario would be October. But we've been able to get them some stuff fairly quickly, and I assume as soon as that ink is dry, that that's a multi-week process on some of it. Now, other parts of it, I do know ATACMS was widely reported a few weeks ago that it is included in this. There's a few other, a lot of armor and whatnot, and some of that's going to take a little bit longer. But I don't think that ammunition is going to take 5 months to cross the sea. I guess that's I am not Chuck Farr. I do not have his experience or his knowledge. But that seems like a very long time when we already have the logistics train already running. Well, not at this very second, we don't, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, but transport of military supply across the Atlantic is still time consuming. As Chuck says, it travels at 12 knots. Lands in German ports, has to be unloaded, transferred to trains going to Ukraine. So it does take some time, and when it arrives in Ukraine, it must be unloaded and then deployed to the front lines. However, Ukraine determines it's most needed. And the other thing to remember, Forrest, is that Ukraine really needs 2.5 million 155 millimeter shells a year in order to maintain a fire rate that begins to approach the Russian artillery fire rate, and especially counter battery fire. This is where Ukraine has proved most effective with counter battery fire from its artillery emplacements, able to detect Russian artillery emplacements and take them out. With drones and with limited artillery, Ukraine did set a record in the month of March for destroying Russian artillery, 976 pieces, all told. Only in the month of March, Ukraine was able to destroy. But having destroyed nearly 1,000 Russian artillery pieces in just 30 odd days, and Russia still maintaining an artillery superiority, gives you some idea of the amount of artillery that Russia has deployed to Ukraine to fight this war. Thousands of artillery pieces, Forrest.
Absolutely. And I I truly hope and pray that those shells that they're getting, it's what, up to 1.7 million from the Czech deal, would hopefully be the start of hitting into that dent, and it would help, allow Ukraine to start using some stockpiles that they haven't touched because they couldn't, with good faith, mess with that when they didn't know when anything else is coming. But I see one of my favorite Swedes in the whole wide world has her hand up, so I'm going to call on Jenny.
Just a quick question first before I go into my spiel, but how many Swedes do you know?
One,
Ah, I feel honored.
you're very, you should be. You're very welcome.
Thank you. So my first thought is who is producing so many artillery shells for Russia, and what quality do they hold? I hope that there's like a lot of them that like kind of just blow up in their face just because, it's Russia. Because I'm wondering how many duds they have. I was reading today that one of the things that is holding up the Swedish production uh, was actually one that I hadn't even thought of. Every batch that they make, so each shift, and they have 5 shifts, they go around the clock. Each shift is making one batch, and each batch needs to be quality tested. I don't know how many like pieces that means that they have to test fire, but they don't have enough ranges where they can test them, where they can do the quality testing. And so right now it's like a backlog. And I'm thinking, could there be like other countries that can help us with the quality testing so that we can get these shells, sent away? I don't want them to blow up in the face of the Ukrainians. I don't want them to be duds. I want them to be of good quality. And can we just get can Sweden, the factory in Sweden, get a little bit of assistance with this? Maybe that's what I'm thinking. But I'm hoping that Russia does not get help, or whoever is making shells for Russia. I hope they don't get a lot of help with their quality testing. And I'm hoping like 9 out of 10 are duds, and just and maybe 8 out of 9 can be duds, and the ninth can be like a surprise. You don't know if it's going to blow up where you're aiming, or if it's just going to blow up in your face and help them demolish their artillery pieces. Anyway, thank you.
Well, I think a lot of these artillery shells are coming from North Korea. Russia also uses 122 millimeter artillery shells. And of course, Russia produces hundreds of thousands of its own artillery shells, 122, 155 millimeter. But there have been reports of the North Korean shells either being duds or uh, performing poorly in Russian artillery. And yes, blasting apart Russian artillery barrels. But the other thing apparently that is harming Russian artillery on the front lines, and we love to see this, is the lack of maintenance. An artillery piece can only fire so many hundreds or thousands of times before it needs to go into repair and be refurbished so it can be redeployed and fired again. And keeping uh, these Russian artillery pieces ready to fire has been a daunting proposition for the Russians logistically and in terms of zero line maintenance. Yenny.
Aw, that is so not like Russia to not do the repairs and upkeep on their crap. I mean, who knew? I mean, I never heard of the tires blowing up on their trucks. It's like they just kept stealing the money that was meant for maintenance and put it in their own damn pockets. Well, good going, Russia. Keep it up because it bites you in the ass. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Yenny. Um, David has dropped down, but in the back channel, he sent me a couple of messages of a listener who had DM'd him about Article 5 of NATO, and this is the self-defense mechanism of NATO. When one NATO member country is attacked and it invokes Article 5, it is requesting all NATO members to respond to protect that NATO member under attack. And this listener is asking who in the United States makes this decision. Well, no single person in the United States makes a decision. I think that the president, the secretary of defense, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would act together and decide exactly how they would respond if Article 5 is invoked. It does not require any NATO member nation to go to arms. Every individual NATO member has the leeway to decide how it will respond if Article 5 is invoked by a member nation. Will it respond with troops on the ground? Will it respond with military aid of a different kind? Will it respond with humanitarian aid in the event of an attack on NATO territory? So it doesn't require uh, military a military response, and it doesn't require a boots on the ground response. Every single NATO country that has, as I say, the leeway to decide how it will um, join in an Article 5 invocation. And it would be a decision made collaboratively in the United States, announced by probably the defense minister or the secretary of defense. My God, Forrest, I'm becoming almost European here. The United States doesn't have ministers, they have secretaries, secretaries of defense, of state, etc. And it would be up to the Secretary of Defense to announce just how the United States would be responding if Article 5 is invoked. And if this questioner, who was a listener, is still listening, I hope that helps answer your question. I think I got it right. If I didn't, I know that Beefeater, who understands the NATO articles probably much better than I do, in much greater detail, will be able to correct me. He will either do it in the back channels or by volunteering to come up and say, Alan, haven't you been listening to me? I've tried to tutor you, and you haven't learned your NATO lessons. So in news tonight, Forrest, and it's been something of a quiet midweek day, but one of the things that caught my attention was a a report, really a simple statement from Ukraine. Just let me find the individual who made the statement, but it's about the destruction of Ukrainian towns and villages on the zero line. Literally, hundreds of villages have been demolished by Russian shelling. In the words of this Ukrainian minister, they have ceased to exist. For example, on Kherson on the south bank of the Dnipro, the little village of Oleshki essentially destroyed. Villages not only in Kherson but in Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk oblasts, and then turning the corner and going up to Kharkiv and into Sumy Oblast. Just dozens and dozens of Ukrainian villages have been wiped off the map, all by Russian shelling. And I think that is a significant piece of news to consider. In it puts the destruction of Ukraine into a context we all need to understand. We see the destruction rain down on Kharkiv and Kiev, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson every single day. These are big cities. We seem to miss the utter obliteration of Ukrainians' homes and villages, apparently too small to notice elsewhere along the zero line. Catton, welcome, and please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. It was my question about the NATO Article 5. And my question was actually about who in the US decides if the US is going to respond or not to Article 5. Let's say Trump gets to be the new president, and the Baltic states get attacked by Russia. Can he, by himself, actually decide not to respond to the Article 5 because he thinks the Baltic states is too far away? Or is there some function within the US how to respond to a NATO Article 5 request? Thank you.
Fortunately, we have Beefeater with us. I don't know if there is a legislative avenue available for an Article 5 response. For example, could the Senate initiate a resolution to require a response? And I don't know the answer to that question. I think it is purely an executive decision, but not by one person in the US government, rather a collaborative decision made by the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by the Secretary of Defense, and by the President himself. Beefeater, help me out here.
Good evening, Ellen. How are you doing? You're right. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. So I'll try and answer the question as I understand it. I won't speak for who makes the call for the US, if that were the case. But I think it's important to understand what happens when a member state is actually attacked and how Article 5 is actually invoked. I think it's important to understand from the beginning, for Article 5 to be applicable, an armed attack has to occur on the territory of a NATO member. and there is territorial limitations of when Article 5 can actually be invoked, and that is covered in Article 6, which delimits the area in which the armed attack has to take place. It loosely defined, not loosely, it is roughly defined as North America, Europe, and any other clearly defined areas north of the Tropic of Cancer. So there's a territorial limitation on that. I think the next thing that you need to consider is that in terms of invoking Article 5, when a country turns to NATO for assistance, so let's bypass how America decides. I would imagine you had the right answer, which is a request will be considered through a joint chiefs of staff and the American president as the executor. If they make that request to NATO, it's not an automatic assumption there's going to be a response. So what happens is that request goes to the North Atlantic Council, which is NATO's highest decision-making body. And it has to reach a consensus and determine that an armed attack has occurred within the North Atlantic area. And NATO member states are then obliged to assist the victim member. But the important thing is this. In terms of the assistance that's going to be provided, that obligation is caveated by the fact that it falls to each country to decide how exactly it will respond. It's a kind of discretionary element. It doesn't remove the fact that NATO members must determine the necessary action in good faith, but it does mean that some will only respond in kind by financial support or sanction support or non-military means. So their response, it can't be manifestly unreasonable. That is, sharing redundant information after Russia carries out an armed attack on a NATO member wouldn't benefit them in their response. I have, as you say, as you've mentioned before, Ellen, I've come in this space a few times, and I've really tried to press home that the European Union has Article 42.7, which in my view is more superior in terms of the go-to place for any attack on a NATO country, sorry, not a NATO country, an EU country under the EU mutual defense policy. But your question was around the United States, and I think whoever raised the question earlier, it was around who would invoke that in the US. So I won't go into Article 42.7 because we're talking about the US, not about any European Union country.
Thank you, Beefeater. And Cadden, I hope that partially answers your question. It's I think like so many decisions taken by any country, but especially here in the United States, it can be so political. And with Trump as one of the decision makers, because of his opposition to the NATO alliance itself, and his belief in American isolationism, and the fact that he was quite possibly the highest placed Russian operative ever to work in the United States, his willingness to commit America to defend a fellow NATO nation is there's no question about that. But Beefeater, just to circle back to some previous discussions we've had about security for Ukraine, Ukraine actually is better protected by becoming a member of the EU, which can occur much more rapidly, I think, than Ukraine becoming a member of NATO.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, when I say it's the go-to treaty in terms of defense in Europe, the reason why Article 42.7 is a better option is because of the wording. And at the end of the day, this is all legal speak. So in Article 5 under NATO, there has to be an armed attack. And there are various legal standards that have to be met in order for the attack to be qualified as something to respond to. For example, is a cyber attack an attack, or is a blockade in a harbour an attack? Technically, at law, it's not. So NATO wouldn't be able to respond to that. If we turn to Article 42.7 under the Treaty of the European Union, the language is actually a little more ambiguous, a lot more ambiguous, and is open to a greater scope for interpretation. So they don't use the word armed attack, they use the words armed aggression. And that opens up a whole world of pain for someone who might, for example, blockade a harbour or do something that doesn't constitute an attack, but does constitute armed aggression. So when Ukraine becomes a member of the European Union, they would be protected under the collective defence policy of the European Union. And the other distinction between 42.7 and Article 5 is that there is an obligation for every member to apply every available means of support. So that discretionary support under NATO doesn't exist under 42.7. 42.7, the obligation is basically you throw everything at it, the kitchen sink, if you have to. And that includes military support. So there is an obligation. The standard is a lot lower and the obligation is a lot higher under 42.7. So arguably, with Ukraine coming into the European Union, they would immediately be better protected and certainly not suffer the runaround more of determining whether an attack is an attack or not. If it's armed aggression, it's armed aggression, and that's a very wide scope for interpretation.
Beefeater, I'm not sure I've asked this question previously, but I do know that membership in NATO is available except to nations currently at war. This would have to be waived by NATO members. And there is a movement afoot, by the way, of NATO member countries willing to waive this provision and bring Ukraine into NATO as a new member. But my question is this: if Ukraine enters the EU, and it's preparing to do this, talks are well underway. Ukraine is meeting standards that the EU requires of new members. Is the protection of Article 42.7 retroactive? And in other words, would the security umbrella cover Ukraine the day it becomes a member of the EU?
Alan, I'll give you my personal opinion. I can't provide you with of evidence of this opinion other than I am read in both Article 42.7 and Article 5. My interpretation of it is yes, they would immediately be covered, but I would need to be able to reference that view against a very specific clause in the articles that covers that, and there will be that clause and there will be that legal determination. But my impulsive response is, I think, yes, they would be covered immediately. It's a bit like saying, it's a bit like inviting Ukraine into NATO. Irrespective of if there was a war going on or not, if they join NATO, they will be covered immediately. I think the argument you're talking about is there is resistance and there is precedence and there is a policy of not admitting members who are actively involved in a conflict, and that's the kind of barrier you've got to get through. But let's hypothetically say they decide to overlook that, which I doubt they'll do. But if they did, and Ukraine became a member of NATO straight away, they would be covered under the umbrella of NATO, irrespective of whether there was a war going on or not. So that hurdle, that legal hurdle, needs to be overcome first. I don't believe that NATO would unanimously agree to allow Ukraine to enter the fold while the conflict is going on. I do understand the emotional and the moral justification for pushing for that. It would be great, but I don't think you're going to get the sort of consensus you need to admit the member. If that helps you, have I answered your question?
Yes, I think so. I know that the United States would probably stand in the way, and I think Germany would stand in the way of Ukraine's accession into NATO for this very reason. They are engaged in an active war. But there is a movement underway, Beefeater, supported by defense ministers of the Baltics, I think also of Denmark, other NATO members in Europe, to invite Ukraine to become an immediate member of NATO. It's the 50th anniversary NATO summit is going to occur
It's the
in
75th.
Washington.
75th anniversary.
75th. That's correct. 75th. I'm, by converting 75th anniversaries into 50th anniversaries, Beefeater, I make myself 25 years younger.
Alan, if I may, can I just briefly switch back a topic? Just going on to Blinken's speech. Now, I don't want to appear to be overly critical of the US, because let me preface what I'm about to say is I think the US have provided an awful amount of help, not an awful, a tremendous amount of help to Ukraine, and Ukraine probably wouldn't be where it is today without the US support. Now, that said, I do have a criticism around Blinken's speech, as you do, and I picked up your eloquent language around his trying to fluff and saying nothing in diplomatic speak. Here's something for you to consider. So NATO, the US have said, please don't strike inside Russia. They've asked Ukraine, we don't want you to strike inside Russia. My consideration is this: what happened? What would have happened if after 9/11, NATO or the world or whoever, a country went to the US and said, please don't strike Al Qaeda in its home country, only strike it on US soil? Well, what about in World War II after Pearl Harbor? What happens if Churchill went to the US and said, whatever you do, don't go and attack Japan, don't attack them in their country? The kind of hypocrisy is crazy in trying to limit Ukraine's reach into Russia. To, by the way, they're striking infrastructure, revenue infrastructure, which is refineries. They're not exactly putting bombs in the middle of Moscow, in the middle of kindergartens and schools. They're taking out revenue, which is feeding the war. That's the first bit of view that I wanted to quickly articulate while I'm on. The second one was, you have mentioned that NATO have, in celebration of their 75th anniversary, have got together and they are mulling over the idea of donating $100 billion over 5 years. And I just wanted to maybe run a number past you and ask people to consider what that actually means. So NATO are thinking, not actually doing, but they're thinking about donating $100 billion towards the war in Ukraine to help Ukraine. Over 5 years, that's $20 billion a year. How much do you think Putin spent on the war in 2023? Have you got a good idea?
I think it's more than $1 trillion, Beefeater.
No, not quite. No, he spent over 3% of his GDP, which in real terms is equivalent to 67 billion US dollars. Now it's actually a lot higher than that, so I'm understating everything. But we can at least attribute at least 3% of his GDP in 2023 went to the war, $67 billion. In 2024, that will double or more. So even taking a hyper-conservative view, in 2024, he's going to spend $100 billion. And here we are, whoopsing and yipping and hooraying, NATO mulling over $100 billion over 5 years, which is $20 billion a year. We just got to do the maths on that before we start clapping and being overly positive that $100 billion is going to match what Putin is spending at the moment. It's not, and it's not a solution. We need to be spending a lot more than that. Anyway, those are the two views I want to share. Thank you, Alan.
Alan, real quick, it's 7:00 my time. I need to jump off, but I did want to have just a short response to Beefeater's question about Blinken's statements and America's don't attack inside Russia. I mean, they're still doing it. Is it not just performative words for the greater this Biden de-escalation policy procedure that they've been running the entire time? Asking them not to do something, but it's not like we are policing them. Now they are using their own homegrown equipment. I guess to me it seems like fluff. It seems just like language, but that's just my interpretation of it.
Forrester, thanks. If I may, try and put yourself into the position you're in the US and Pearl Harbor just been bombed, and Churchill came to the US and said, "Do not attack Japan." Now, I'm being very hypothetical here, but I'm asking what your emotional response might be, even if he didn't really mean it, but he articulated it and he said it. He said it loud for the world to hear. As an American, how would you have felt? You would have, I'm going to presume something here. I tell you how I would have felt as an American. I would have thought, that is not the way to show me support. Even if you don't mean it and you're just doing it for political showmanship, what I need now more than ever after Pearl Harbor is people to coalesce and unite around me. There shouldn't be any public squabbles or gamesmanship being played with saying, please don't attack Japan. It's an asinine suggestion to say, do not attack Russian infrastructure. I think it sends out the very wrong message. Blinken should be sending out a message saying, we are with you, not in your defense, but we are with you for your victory. They've got to stop this defeatist language about talking about supporting Ukraine to defend itself. That is defeatist language, and it's murderous language, because as long as you're supplying Ukraine to defend itself, Russia will double its production to continue the attacks. We've got to stop talking about defending. We've got to start talking about victory, about kicking them out of the country. Art, thanks very much, Royce.
I don't disagree with you, sir. I'm on board. I was just responding to my interpretation of the events, and that's the current state that this administration has been in for better or worse since the start of this the full-scale invasion. I hope it changes. I hope that the election in the fall alters the political landscape in such a way that maybe allows for a different tactic. I do think the political landscape is a greater factor in White House decision making than most would consider. But I don't agree with it. I was just establishing where I thought it was coming from. But with that, oh, go ahead, Beefeater.
Sorry, Forrest, I just want to re-emphasize, I don't want anyone to interpret this as, you know, I'm ungrateful and I'm attacking the US. I'm not. I believe, my underlying belief is that there is a overwhelming number of Americans who are clearly capable of not only supporting Ukraine, but of being astute and of being at the forefront of leading peaceful efforts around the world. And for that, I know they will come true. But it's a very difficult situation at the moment with all these politics going on. So please don't misinterpret my words as an attack or a criticism of Americans. It's not. It's about these statements being made by politicians, and they really don't do us any favors. Thanks, Forrest.
See, Beefeater, you're doing what we're not supposed to do here on Twitter/X and have a disagreement, or rather a discussion around a controversial topic respectfully and with nuance. And as long as you come with that, I do not mind when people criticize things that either Biden, admin, America, whatnot has done, as long as it's based in this good faith desire to fix and do better for everyone. And yes, I appreciate it, even though we can call out where it needs to be called out. Before I sign off, I want to remind everyone, if you are American, to call your representatives, specifically the three Mikes, heads of House Foreign Intel, Armed Services, and I think I can mix two up together. Mike Turner, Mike McCall, and Mike. Gosh, I started without looking it up first. But anyways, call the guys. They're on CC's profile, pinned at the top. I can post it down in the purple pill here in a second too, and ask them to pressure Mike Johnson into getting this vote on the floor. They are going to bring forward their loan nonsense. It will be attached to a bunch of other nonsense that won't pass the House. And when it doesn't pass the House, that's the moment that I do believe Republicans that do truly support Ukraine will jump onto the discharge petition to get that vote. Hopefully that's sooner than later. And you can help by making those phone calls. If you're not in America, call your own reps. Do whatever you can to make sure that you're thanking them for their support or pressuring them for more. Have a wonderful night, Alan and Robin. I will boost you as soon as I get to my phone.
Thank you, Forrest. Beefeater, stay with us for just a moment, because I'm interested in your analysis of Antony Blinken's press conference response to the question about Ukraine's strikes against Russian oil refineries, and now we know Russian factories producing drones as well. And Forrest mentioned this. The Blinken struggled to make that statement, and I noticed that too. As good a diplomat as Blinken is, he also wears his heart on his sleeve, and Blinken, Lloyd Austin have been the most noted supporters of Ukraine inside the Biden administration, arguing for more support given more quickly and given in greater numbers, and given exactly as Ukraine asked for it and needs it. The last Secretary of State who resigned as a matter of honor was Cyrus Vance. This was in the aftermath of Jimmy Carter's attempt to rescue American hostages in Iran. Cyrus Vance didn't agree with that rescue attempt. It was a disaster, and he resigned in the aftermath. I happen to feel that Blinken, regardless of his commitment to American diplomacy and his lifelong profession of being a diplomat, I think he is approaching this threshold of a resignation of honor.
Yeah, so I think that there is a. He's been asked to hold the line, and I think he's clearly finding it quite uncomfortable in doing that. And hats off to him for holding the line. I don't think this, and well, I would doubt it very much if this is Anthony Blinken and his policy. This is the policy of the administration that he has to deliver. And so I suppose the sharp criticism should come to those who advise Joe Biden on military strategy, and it should come to Joe Biden for sitting on the fence in many respects. Because I suppose the litmus test is asking questions. You mentioned it earlier. How many Patriots has the US delivered to Ukraine directly? Zero, nada, nothing. How many Atacms have been delivered? Zero. It's not looking very good in terms of finding support for the argument to say that we need to defeat Russia for its genocidal war in Ukraine. It's beginning to sound more like let's hold the line until we can get our political machinations sorted out. And I hope we are going to see either a strong change in voice from the US after the elections. If not, I think the world's going to be a very difficult place to live in.
I don't think we can wait until after the American elections in November. I think that Joe Biden needs to step up now and behave presidentially. I hope Joe Biden reads David McCullough's biography of Harry Truman and takes a lesson from Harry Truman serving as president. Truman really did speak honestly to the American people. He really did believe in that saying that he adopted. The buck stops here, right on the president's desk. I want Biden to get Truman's reminder out and put it on the desk in the Oval Office. The buck stops here. I think that Biden has taken advantage of Congress in a way up until this point, where Congress has stalled continuing aid to Ukraine. In other words, as long as Biden had all the budgeted funds required for the presidential drawdown authority, as long as Biden was able to put military aid for Ukraine into the defense budget, he was sailing free. He was able to give Ukraine everything, as you mentioned, Beefeater, that only America can supply, and he benefited from that. Even in photo ops in Kyiv, and I give him high marks for going to Kyiv to meet Zelensky. But this is a much different situation now. Biden has to do everything he possibly can to break this logjam that is preventing additional American military aid going to Ukraine, and I don't see him doing it.
I just had I've had a message in the back channel, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. It's relevant to this conversation. It comes from a listener by the name of Chris Komatsu. And I'll just read the tweet out for you because there's a lot that chimes with my view as well. He says, Blinken's been the most supportive and the most hawkish, and in his opinion, the most competent in the entire cabinet until he made the statement. Last year, he said that Ukraine should use Atakins, how they see fit, which the admin then walked back later. But this just seems like a clampdown prior to the election, which doesn't make sense to me because he says Ukraine winning would help Biden win the re-election. And I think there's a lot of good stuff said in that tweet, in that statement. He has been hawkish before. We do need to acknowledge that. And as I said, I think this is not his view. He's been made to hold the line. So he is uncomfortable, and he has had previous hawkish statements walked back by the administration. Thank you, Chris, for getting hold of me.
Someone is trimming Antony Blinken's sails, and I don't know who it is. Robin, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Alan. Beefeater, it's nice to see you up. Thank you for all of the work that you do and all the messages that you feed to us in the back channel so we can sound like we know what we're talking about. I do appreciate it. I agree 100% with what you just read. The thing that I really don't understand is Biden waffling on Ukraine, he's making himself look weak. And I can't see how this could possibly be, even if it's a crass election strategy. I think it's exactly the opposite of what he should be doing if he really intends to win. To win the presidential election, strength appeals to people, and if we were using our strength to really support Ukraine, Ukraine could be decimating the Russians, and that would have to be good for his election prospects. So I'm very confused about what's going on in this country, and really I wouldn't say I'm despairing. I haven't gotten to that yet, but it's just horrible when you see what we've been starving Ukraine of ammunition for 6 months already, and on top of that to start to make this statement. I mean, if I were Ukrainian, I know Ukrainians already feel abandoned, and to get kicked in the teeth like this when they're doing something that they're striking totally legitimate military targets with their own weapons. They're not using American weapons. Who the hell are we to even have an opinion on that? They're not doing anything wrong, and they're doing what they need to do to try to protect their people. And I'm going to get back off my soapbox, Alan, because I'm just beside myself at this point with all of this nonsense. Anyway, back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Robin. Welcome. You and I will be leading the conversation tonight. We expect Language Learner in about 45 minutes to bring us a battlefield update. Meanwhile, let's go to Dan. Let's go to Terry Furious, and Beefeater, if you can, please stay with us.
Robin, I agree with you 100%. Bad posturing all the way around. I got a question though. Do you think if Hillary Clinton was in that position now, she's not. I like to do what ifs. I know. If she was in that position now, do you think she would have fought for? I happen to think I don't think she'd lay down and take that. I'm surprised that had I been I'm not, but had I been in Blinken's position, I would have resigned if I was forced to make a statement that I wasn't comfortable with. And I would have argued my case to the point where they'd said, you need to leave or something. I just don't understand this at all. It's terrible. And I think it's going to hurt Biden. It's not helping him at all. It's not helping the administration. I don't know where he's getting his advice from. I don't think it's just Jake. I think it's a bunch of other people. I hope they're not leftovers from Obama's administration. I'm just very disappointed.
Yeah, Dan, I think it's campaign consultants, and I think it's pollsters. And really, and Joe Biden has been in this business of politics long enough to know that polls change, and that you can actually influence polls by stepping up to the bully pulpit and using it to your benefit. One thing I'll say about Antony Blinken, I think that he is one of the most competent secretaries of state that the United States has ever been privileged to have. And why didn't he push back against whoever in the White House is trimming his sails? I think it's for the following reasons. Antony Blinken is a lifelong diplomat. He is a well-trained diplomat. He believes that the most important thing is to continue the conversation. The most important thing is to retain your seat at the table. And in Blinken's case, that is the seat in cabinet meetings in the White House, one of the most powerful seats in the world you can occupy. And Antony Blinken sits next to the president in these cabinet meetings. So I'm sure that Antony Blinken is conflicted about the statement he made. I think that he struggled to make it, and I don't really think it reflects his thinking or feelings about supporting Ukraine. But Blinken made the statement to the best of his ability because he wants to be around to continue the fight on behalf of Ukraine. I'm not apologizing for Antony Blinken. I am completely stunned by this torturous diplomatic language that he used in the press conference when a fellow foreign minister was able to answer simply and directly. So I think that Blinken is probably having some sleepless nights, but look at what that man is doing. He's flying around the world from the Middle East to Ukraine to Europe to South America. He is actively looking for support of Ukraine in South America. He's actively engaged in the other hotspot in the world, this being in Israel and Gaza. I think that I still regard him as one of the best secretaries of state the United States has ever had. This is a low moment for him. I expect him to rise from it. Robin.
Yeah, just very quickly, we have a lot of hands. I agree with everything you've said, and I think Blinken probably did push back. This may have been the best he could get out of the situation. The fact that he was clearly not happy with what he was having to say, I think, also sent a message. If nothing else, the Ukrainians are very adept at reading these kind of things. I, for one, I hope to God he doesn't resign, no matter how bad it gets, because I don't think anybody that would replace him would be as good on Ukraine as he is. I'm sure he's having lots of sleepless nights. I honestly, I think him hanging on by a fingernail at this point is damn near heroic. And I just pray to God has the strength to keep on hanging on and is able to continue his pushback and maybe get Biden and some of the people in the administration to move a little bit, to have a little bit of a little bit of I can't think of anything that's not crude, but to, get their act together and be a little bit stronger on all respect,
Robin, let's go to the hands. And I think the order is Dan, Terry, and Adam. Dan, please.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Yeah, I agree with what you said, Alan, and I'm taking it to heart. But I'm only going to make this comment. As a voter, regardless of pollsters and campaign advisors, be damned. If I was the president, I would have said, I don't care. My character, I can't do this. This is what I'm going to do. So I go for character. If I don't go for, you know, yeah. So yeah, this hurts his character a lot, our president. So I'm disappointed there. So that's what I go for, not pollsters. I think if he had gone and said, I'm going to override you and do this, I'm going to, go with my heart or my brain, heart probably more, and stop this or help them and not boss them around and tell them what to do with other people's weapons that they're getting. I would have voted for him, and I still will, but I think he would have garnered more support. I think, pollsters and campaign advisors sometimes, they get in the way. I think they're more trouble than they're worth, actually. And he needs to bully pulpit. You're right.
Yes, campaign advisors, campaign consultants, campaign managers do get in the way. And it's only the most experienced campaign consultants who eventually, in the course of a campaign, with a hard to handle candidate, and I think Joe Biden is a hard to handle candidate, eventually they will say, let Joe be Joe. They need to set Joe Biden free. I've worked with candidates like that in the past. It always seems to be a low moment in the campaign, but there's this meeting in which everyone agrees, let Mike be Mike, or let Neil be Neil, and sometimes it works out for you, sometimes it doesn't. But in Joe Biden's case, the man has a 50-year career in politics. He knows how to he knows how to be himself on the campaign trail, and I think that most Americans would connect with that authenticity, with that reality. So I hope at some point in the campaign, as we get into the summer, someone just says, Joe, be Joe, as Joe was as vice president. Before Obama endorsed gay marriage in the United States, Joe Biden endorsed it. A Catholic against Catholic teaching by the Pope. Joe Biden came out in favor of gay marriage in the United States, took Obama by surprise. That wasn't the only time Joe Biden stepped out in advance of the president he served as vice president. Now I really do want to see Joe be Joe and step out in support of Ukraine. Just let me go to back to Beefeater, please, and then we'll go to additional hands here.
Thank you, Alan. Alan, there's an underlying niggle that I have about this conversation, and that is, yes, I've been critical about the speech, about what Blinken has uttered, but the underlying worry for me is I like to talk about evidence-led and data-led views. I like to talk about concrete facts and things that we know are true. Right now, we're speculating. We're all speculating, and we're all making some pretty large assumptions around why Blinken has said what he said, and why America is delaying, and why America is fence-sitting to some degree. I would counsel you'd be very foolish to underestimate the Americans. I have an inherent belief that there is a long game at play here, and we don't know enough facts. We don't know enough about what may be going on in the background that has motivated this, and we're leaping to all sorts of conclusions and criticisms. Some of them may be fair, but I think some, when this war is done and dusted and the autobiographies come out, I think there's going to be a lot of information that will help us understand the long game, and it will help us understand the reasons behind the decisions that don't seem to make sense and are out of character of some of these players, be it Blinken or Joe Biden or many others. It's what we don't know that is driving some of these decisions. And I think we just need to maybe cool off on the assumptions a bit, cool off on the criticisms a bit, and understand that there are other factors at play. And as you know, this war is made up of a number of theatres. There's the military theatre that we're all discussing at the moment around ammunition and arms and providing financial assistance. But the other theatres are also at play as well. And one of those theatres, in the economic theatre, might be a driving factor behind the ambivalence or the reticence for the US to take direct action. And that could, I'm going to hypothesize a moment, that could be, for example, the supply of nuclear fuel. As you know, America still depends on and still uses Russia for quite a sizable chunk of its nuclear fuel requirements. So I think there are other considerations to be made here that Joe Biden is having to play a very difficult game, and there have got to be strong reasons behind why he hasn't taken direct action and why he's asking his officers to voice a kind of a cool tone and the sort of rhetoric about not attacking Russia that might be originating in some other theatre of war that we don't have information about, we're not privy to, and we're all leaping to conclusions and assumptions. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Beefeater. I think the only thing we actually know as a result of Blinken's statement and some other statements, General Brown's statements about supplying ATACMS, for example, the only thing we know, and I think we know it for a certainty now, that there has been an ongoing debate in the Biden administration about red lines and about the possibility of escalation. That is triggering some kind of Russian response if the United States made a wrong move of some kind, supplying Ukraine with weapons. But the other thing I am beginning to feel very strongly is that America's reticence, and it is reticence, in fully supplying Ukraine with everything it needs, this reticence has resulted in Russian escalation. When a nation at war, and Russia is at war against Ukraine, unleashes the kind of aerial attack with drones and cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and glide bombs. Zelensky himself recounted all the number of drones and missiles and glide bombs that Russia has unleashed against Ukraine just in the month of March. This is a kind of escalation that occurred only because the United States interrupted its military supply of Ukraine.
So, Alan, if I can just jump in here and just talk quickly about, have you heard about the madman theory?
Tell me about the madman theory. This is not the Netflix series that was so popular about Madison Avenue.
Funny enough, it's a theory that may, I speculate, may be in play here at the moment. The madman theory, it's a political theory. It's commonly associated with the foreign policy of the US under President Richard Nixon and his administration, who tried to make the leaders of the Soviet bloc, the communist bloc in those days, think that Nixon was irrational and volatile, and that they would avoid provoking the US in fear of an unpredictable response. Now, I suggest that may be in play at the moment. There's got to be some reason why the US doesn't want to provoke Russia at the moment. They probably, I think Putin has done a really good job of demonstrating the madman theory, because at the moment he is unpredictable. And I think Joe Biden doesn't want to escalate. And at the moment, if there's any unpredictable and irrational person on the block, it may be argued it's Putin, although Putin, I think, is a very rational person. But he's certainly demonstrating a volatility that Biden has to be very careful about, because he doesn't want to provoke a full-scale war, a world war. He doesn't want that to happen. And that's understandable, notwithstanding the fact that I believe the nuclear war threats is basically a chronology of wet farts coming from Putin. He wouldn't go down that route, but he's used it, and he's used it in a way that has intimidated many countries across the world, probably including the US. That could be a consideration. Thanks, Alan.
At the moment, I'd say Putin is a better poker player than Biden. And I do regard Putin as a gambler. His invasion of Ukraine was a huge gamble. And all the chips are on the table right now. Putin keeps pushing more and more chips to the center. And there are a lot of cards left to turn up. Let's go to Terry, to Adam, and to Dryfly, please.
Thanks, Adam, and good evening, and to Robin and everyone else. I almost feel, being the other side of the pond, that what's going on isn't really for me to discuss, but on the other hand, the view from across the pond. I put my hand up initially to ask who the hell are these advisors that Biden has, but I think that question has sort of been answered one way or another. There must definitely be somebody influencing him somehow. And as you've all been asking, the question is why? My fear is about the fact that the USA is beginning to get a reputation for not being reliable. And I really hope that we can overcome that soon. Like probably Robert, like most of you probably, you've heard the fact that a lot of the Ukrainians are saying, well, sod the USA, we'll do it all ourselves. The other thing was, regarding Blinken, I have only heard about what he said. I haven't yet seen his speech, but I am glad to hear that he felt uncomfortable saying it, and that it sounds like he was being cornered as well. My only thoughts as to why is perhaps they are waiting for Putin to fully believe that the USA has left Ukraine alone and is going to take more risks and gamble with trying to push further. I'm still hoping that this discharge petition goes through next week. And then maybe all the tables will be turned. But could it be that, as Beefeater was saying, they're trying to play the sort of long game, let the world see Putin for what he really is, basically a genocidal maniac, selfish and all the rest of it, like we all know. And hopefully the tables will suddenly turn. But I know it's a hope beyond hope. But it is very puzzling, even from across the pond. So in a way, I'm reassured to know that you all feel the same, that it seems so out of character for Biden. And it does really feel as if the whole of the USA, both the Republicans and the Democrats, it's no longer bipartisan, or it's no longer just Johnson. It's just very concerning. So fingers crossed, pray as much as we can, and let's hope the reason will be revealed soon. Thank you for letting me chat.
Thank you, Terry. To Adam, to Dryfly, and to Bruce. Adam, please.
Why do I have to be right before dry fly, guys? That's not fair. I was just wanted to ask you a while ago, Alan. I love you, dry fly. You're amazing. That's the only reason I said that. That you said specifically you think it was the pollsters influencing the administration. And what your reasons for that would be. My guess would be gas prices and the recent spike lining up with news of Ukraine hitting oil refineries. And they don't want to be seen as encouraging increased gas prices. So that's my question for you. If that was the person, I didn't hear the specific reason why you thought the pollsters were influencing them in that way. And I just, before I lay my little head to bed every night, I pray that, because I don't understand what's going on, and like I know Dryfly is going to say and calm me down and say, I don't think it's, we don't know what they see, all the intelligence, which is totally true. I pray every night that this is as cynical as it would be, that they're just waiting until closer to the election, and they're just going to turn on the taps and get some big wins before the election, and I pray that's the play here, because I don't understand it otherwise, and I know I'm not supposed to, but it's really frustrating. I'm sure you all feel the same way. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.
Heroyam Slava, Adam. I don't think it's gas prices, frankly. I think it, and when I say the pollsters, the campaign consultants, they influence the candidate, and the candidate is the president of the United States. Joe Biden needs to be reelected. Joe Biden believes in his heart that his campaign for reelection is absolutely decisive in determining democracy in the United States. He believes that. You can tell when he speaks about it, whether in a prepared speech or in a press conference. So, and I happen to regard it as true myself. I think that only one candidate running for president can be elected who will guarantee that democracy continues unimpeded here in the United States, and we get to continue our more than 2 century experiment with democracy, because democracy is always an experiment. Joe Biden understands that. Donald Trump doesn't. He wants to undermine democracy and push the United States towards a kind of fascism that was resisted in the 1930s. So in this case, I am not so cynical as to believe that the price of gasoline this summer, which is the driving season in the United States of America, is what is driving Joe Biden's choices about Ukraine. I don't know what is driving them. I think that Joe Biden understands that Ukraine is playing a very close game in this war. And I don't think that Joe Biden wants to tip the scales in any way. But he's also playing a close game in this reelection bid. And the only other thing I can say is that April to November in American electoral politics is an eternity. October to November is an eternity. Sometimes October 15 to Election Day is an eternity. And I think that's going to be that kind of election this year nationally in the United States. So just to Beefeater, to Dry Fly, to Bruce, to Will. Beefeater, please. And thank you for staying with us tonight.
That's okay, Alan. I just want to labor the point that has just been made around a concern about oil prices. I have been on the space a few times and talked about this, but just to sum it up very quickly in answer to that statement. First of all, I really appreciate Edward Hunter Christie's description of drone strikes on Russian refineries. He calls it intelligent economic warfare. And I think that is absolutely, he's hit the nail on the head with that brief description, intelligent economic warfare. But just to dispel or to debunk the myth that attacking Russian refineries is somehow going to rock the world's oil prices, the view is substantially wrong. And there are so many misconceptions in this that need to be dealt with. The general consensus of people who don't know what they're talking about is if these drone strikes continue, it's going to result in taking large volumes of oil off the global market. Firstly, the drone strikes are on refineries, they're not on crude oil storage. Less refining capacity results in more crude oil backing up in the system, which Russia has limited storage space to keep crude oil. So an excess of crude oil will result in two things. Either they've got to cut their production, or they're going to have to offload that excess oil onto the market, which will have a resulting deflationary effect. The price of oil will come down. Reuters reported that the impact of the drone strikes, this was as of the end of February, had impacted upwards of 900,000 barrels of oil per day that cannot be refined. It doesn't say 900,000 barrels of crude oil that hasn't been produced, but it can't be refined. And that 900,000 barrels of oil needs to go somewhere. And with that limited storage, it's going to be offloaded into the market at a massive discount to Brent, which will deflate have a deflationary effect on the global oil prices. Cutting oil, which Putin has announced he's going to, and he is doing in both April and May, he has to cut oil anyway. This is oil production, nothing to do with refining oil. He has to cut his production because he's signed a deal with OPEC Plus, and he's having to stick to that deal. And as a result, his production is coming down over the coming months as well. So drone strikes will, in the medium term, have a deflationary effect on crude oil prices, not an inflationary effect. And the last bit I'll add to this is, if oil prices do spike, it is a sentiment spike. It's a spike based on a fear of the lack of supply on the markets. But that sentiment spike is always very short-lived. And there will invariably be a sentiment strike as Russia starts losing refineries. because they become fearful of a global supply problem, which actually doesn't exist, because America is ramping up its oil supply. Canada and several countries are ramping up their oil supply to pick up the slack. There isn't going to be an issue, but where there will be an issue is with 75% of Russia's refined oil capacity impacted. They have a problem because they depend on an internal market. They need to feed their own population and, most importantly, feed their military with refined oil products, including diesel, which is why they've gone to Belarus. And they've recently imported a massive amount of diesel from Belarus. That's because the refinery strikes are having a significant and positive impact on the war. And so we shouldn't parrot and repeat that line that we should stop striking refineries because it's going to cause oil price hikes. It won't. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Beefeater. You know, unfortunately, Americans, where